Welcome to the ISSA webinar for September 22nd, Creating a Successful Security Awareness Training Program. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Let us also thank Global Learning Systems for their generous support of the presentation. If you are not yet a member of ISSA International, please go to issa.org to learn more about the benefits of membership, and it would be wonderful if you could join us today. We'd like to encourage you to ask questions of our speakers. To ask a question, type your question in the questions area of your screen. We'll collect all the questions for the open Q&A segment that follows the presentation. We'd also like to encourage you to share insights you hear on social media using the hashtag you see on the slides. After today's event, the presentation slides and a recorded version of the webcast will be available to you on the ISSA web conference page. You will also be given the opportunity to print a viewing certificate on this webcast page on BrightTalk that you can submit for continuing education credits such as CPE and CEUs in accordance with the various certifying bodies. I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Kip Schroeder. Kip is a senior solutions architect with SoftChoice. He specializes in Cisco solutions, though feels most at home assisting customers with their network security challenges. Kip has been with SoftChoice since 2020, and prior to that, twice worked for Cisco as a senior systems engineer for a total of 16 years. Kip also teaches network security principles as an adjunct instructor for a local community college. Kip, please begin the conference and introduce our guests.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Pam. I'm particularly excited about today's presentation because as IT professionals, we invest so much in our technology, our devices, our network infrastructure, just to create that defense in depth, the hardened perimeter where we're seeking all this. But we say as organizations that our greatest asset are our people. But in truth, they're also our greatest vulnerabilities. And to that end, the hacker community knows it, and they are geared toward that. And they're looking for the easiest way in, and that, of course, is us. So to that end, they're utilizing phishing, malware, ransomware, you name it. We know that stuff's prevalent. And so this is why today's discussion is going to be so relevant, because we've got to figure out how can we stay competitive in this back and forth battle of organizational security. We've got to address our weakest link. We've got to train our coworkers and ourselves to resist that inquisitive human nature that just can't resist a good click. So to that end, let me introduce our first speaker is Suzanne Gorman. Suzanne is the Vice President and Information Security and Risk Management Evangelist for Global Learning Systems. And she's well known for designing and implementing comprehensive information security programs, with her primary emphasis being on the security awareness. So really what we're in tune with today. And this is why she's so perfect for this particular presentation. She holds both the CISSP and the CRISC certifications. So we look forward to hearing from Suzanne and learning of her experience. Next, we've got her counterpart in crime there, Larry Cates. Larry is the president and CEO of Global Learning Systems, and he works directly with senior level executives and security officers within those companies, where he basically advises and he consults on security programs that are going to help them. So he implements these security awareness trainings tailored to each of those customers, and deals with the behavioral side of these programs. So what I want to do here as we get this thing kicked off is I want to remind you, our audience, to post your questions. We want it to be as interactive, or for you to be able to express questions that you've got, because honestly, you are getting the experts here. This would normally cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just to get this kind of input. They're here for you. So please take the time, post the questions. I'll go ahead and relay them to them as appropriate, and then we can communicate that way. And in fact, I heard Larry say that he was committed to the individual with the best question to funding their child's college education. So you've got to imagine this is going to be a tremendous, tremendous opportunity for you to be able to get that. So Suzanne, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask that you get us pointed in the right direction.
Awesome. So thank you for having me. I just wanted to make sure, Oh my goodness, my first slide just skipped right on by. I've been having problems, technical problems, so my apologies for that. Okay, I'm still having technical problems, it looks like. Are we at the,
Yep,
do you know?
You got it.
My sincere apologies. I've been having technical problems since I got on. So that's always a great way to have an icebreaker in the beginning. I am going to ask this to be interactive. So I am going to be asking you some polling questions. So this way I can help, it's nice to know that somebody else is on the other end of the screen, because if you've ever done a webinar, it's a little strange that you're talking to yourself. So anyways, but I just want to make sure that you know that polling questions are coming. This was an interesting slide that I put together because I want to know what percentage of security breaches are due to human error. And there are so many different stats that are out there, but the latest stat that I could find was from Stanford University. But my point is that if we don't train our employees, a breach would be disastrous to any of our organizations. So, let's keep that in mind and let's proceed. So my first polling question is, where are you in your security awareness journey? So if you could answer 1, 2, or 3, are you just starting out your journey? Are you 2 to 3 years in, or do you think you're 100% done? Please let me know. And I'm going to proceed. I don't know what percentage came in. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about first, does your program work? And this way, you can think about, your own situation that you have. But I would highly recommend that you use assessments. Assessments are a really good tool. I think of them almost as a penetration test against your your employees. So if you run an assessment, you can see where, the weakest areas are within your organization, identifying those areas of risk. And then, you can adjust your program that you can train to mitigate those risks along the way. And then I always recommend like a year later that you go back in and, you reassess again. Now let's see if this is going to work. Okay. There are people, I always say run simulated phishing attacks. And I know that one of my friends is on the line that he totally disagrees with me on this. But I think that this is a really important part that, you should get right. You should be training your users on what they should be looking for. And I cannot stress enough that you must give them remedial training. If you don't train them and you do the same thing day after day, you're never going to see a different outcome. So just keep that in mind. Also, does your cybersecurity program, do you manage, the human risk factors? Do you focus in on key areas? And I'm going to go into where I think the biggest risks are within organizations, but these are just some, just to name a few. And then I also want to talk about, I have customers that I speak to and they tell me, Suzanne, I really need to roll out a program, but I'm so short-staffed. What should I do? And, all security awareness companies, training companies offer managed services. We have managed services and, or you can hire a consultant, so I also act as a consultant with some of our customers. So, you do have people that are out there that can help you. I wanted to see where we were with the security awareness journey, but I'm not seeing the stats. Oh, I see. Okay, so let me give it to you. 17% are just starting. 62% are 2 to 3 years in, and 20% say that they have done it 100%. So those that say that you've done it 100%, we could debate that because I think that we're always learning. I think security awareness is a journey, and you'll see this slide at the end. I don't think that there's a destination. And I think that as we learn and things change over time, right? Years ago, we didn't know about ransomware or, we just didn't have these things. So I think, we will all continue to learn and then educate our employees together. I think this is an awesome slide because I do believe that, if you're not educating your employees, that risk really does accumulate over time. And the other thing that I'm going to go over quite a bit is incident reporting. If your employees are seeing something, you want them to say something. So, you can end up really in a bad situation if your employees are not reporting, suspicious behavior. And I'm trying to change the slide. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the biggest risks according to me. First and foremost, I think security not being woven into your corporate culture is a big problem. So right from the beginning, if you need to have your CEO backing you up and making sure that it is woven into your culture. And I will talk about this more as I get into how to set up a successful program. I think one of the biggest risks, though, is our untrained employees, and I'm sure we would all agree to that. They do fall prey to social engineering attacks. They do, there are situations where you have, some companies have been hit with ransomware. I get calls from customers, and I had a call, and customer said, I was hit with ransomware, what should I do? And I said, well, the first thing you should do is go up to your legal department and see if you have an insurance policy, a cybersecurity, policy to, help you with the investigation. So, you really need to think about, what would you do if this happened to you? The other thing that I've seen before is a business email compromise or CEO fraud. But, I had a customer one time that had a $500,000 wire transfer go out from their organization. Now, my background is financial services, so we always had checks and balances in place. So first thing I did was scratch my head thinking, how can anybody wire transfer out $500,000 without a double check on that? But they did. And I said, well, what did you do with the employee? And they said, well, he was a long-term employee, so we didn't want to lose him. So we trained him, we spoke to him, we put a written notice in his HR file. And then we phished him again. We did another simulated phishing attack. I said, and how did he do? And they said, well, not only did he click on the link, but then he entered in his credentials. So he is no longer employed with that organization. So you really have to, think about where are your problems with your employees. Another thing is I believe that employees don't follow policies and procedures, and most likely because they don't understand them. When I worked for the New York Stock Exchange, I had a friend of mine that consulted with me. His name's Win Shortow. And Win and I looked at these policies, and we actually created something like the Complete Idiot's Guide to Security Awareness Policies. And it was very well received. Everyone had it on their desk, but we made it into we had a graphic artist that was with us. So we had some fun creating this, and people really could understand what the policies meant because we had them written in English for them. So, if your policies are not understandable, please make sure that you get some way to train your employees on what they really mean to them. And let's see, almost 40 years of doing this stuff, I cannot believe I'm still talking about passwords. So, yes, when are we ever going to get rid of passwords? I just can't believe we're still talking about this. But anyway, poor password habits. I would really encourage you to download your hash file and crack it. And then, when you're presenting to your board of directors or you're doing a presentation to your organization, take those passwords. You don't have to, of course, don't relate them to the individual, but put them up in a cloud, like a cloud picture or something that will grab their attention. And it's really amazing how silly most people's passwords are. But I think when you do a visual like that, I think it shakes employees a little bit, and I think it's a really good lesson to be learned. So I encourage you to do that. There's plenty of tools out there to crack that hash file. So my second question is, do you train your developers to develop secure code in their own coding languages? So you think about that, and I'm going to start with the next slide. Because my next slide is, I think the biggest risk to an organization is developers. So developers are trained to develop code. They are not trained on how to develop secure code, which is problematic. If you go in and you do, you hire a third party and you do a pen test, you will find that most of the vulnerabilities that are found are due to poorly written code. So if you don't believe me and you're not in charge of running your pen tests, I encourage you to go back and find your latest pen test and take a look at it. And what I found is over time, I've been on the soapbox that the problem is the code probably for about the last 15 years, but I learned something a few years ago, and it was when we were doing executive readouts for pen testing. And you have to remember, if you have your CIO in there, like your executives, they're not computer science majors. They have their MBAs. So they are not going to understand what a coding problem is until you can relate it to them in English. So learning from, going forward, I tried to ask the pen testers if they would videotape, what they had done and then explain it to the executives like they were explaining it to a 12-year-old. And then all of a sudden I noticed that the iPhones were being put down and the executives were paying attention and they were realizing that was the problem with the vulnerabilities on the external facing web applications. So I have a story. I mean, this was just unbelievable, but one of the pen tests that I was responsible for, of course, I didn't run it. I hired a third party, said that they found a web-facing application vulnerability that opened up a hole into our UPS system. Now, think about how catastrophic that could be. But it gets even worse because if you think about it, the people that run the UPS systems, uninterrupted power supply, if you don't know that, can barely even spell passwords, nevertheless, reset the default passwords. So I went out and I Googled the equipment and the default user IDs and passwords that came with each of the systems, and I could get into each one of them. So you think about how bad that could have been. That could have been a completely catastrophic event. So just really pay attention to what your pen testing results are showing you. Now, I'm going to talk about some training that GLS has. We just actually put out a press release on this today, so I'm pretty excited about it. But I've never really seen, I've done a lot of training for developers, and the training can go in various ways. You could train them on OWASP. The problem is that developers are hard to train because they have a different mindset. They don't want to be playing games. They don't want to be doing quizzes, things like that. But we actually partnered with a company, and they actually take the developers and put them into scenarios. So the scenarios are actual real life examples of security events that have happened. Of course, they changed the names of the company. And we have it so that each developer can use their own coding language. So this is something that's way different than what's ever been introduced before. But I think it's really good that, they can learn about the software, issues visually by tracking the vulnerabilities from, the user interface to the source, right? They can deal with the vulnerable components and examine real, the logic of real world examples. So these were real hacks that had happened. It makes them think about, how does a hacker think, because it makes them go in and analyze the attack surfaces and recreate their steps. So it's pretty awesome. And then they get to understand, how to apply the security fixes and remediate those vulnerabilities. So let's see how you guys did with your polling results for this. Hold on a minute. I'll try to pull this back. I lost my polling results. Okay, I seem to be still having technical difficulties.
Yeah, Suzanne, you had 65% at yes and 35% at no.
Awesome. Okay, that's good. So just be aware of, the way you train your developers. You don't want to bore them to tears. You don't want to give them hours worth of training. Train them the way they're set, they can learn the best. Anyway, the next one I have is executives. And the executives are another unique group of people because they share their passwords with their admins, right? Because they're too lazy to log on to their own systems. I think over time it's gotten a little bit better because they walk around with their laptops. I don't think that they take security training seriously or they want to take it at all. So we have to really, deal with that. A lot of them never believe that their organization will be targeted for an attack because, say, it's not a well-known organization, which is so crazy to me that people would even come out and say that, right? Because I don't think hackers, just go look for the big companies. They look for anything, and even little municipalities. So, I mean, that's pretty sad that they think about that. They don't report security threats or events. So if they get a phishing email, most times they will not report it. And a lot of times they don't report, their lost or stolen equipment. So one time I worked for a company that we had a CEO that was on a plane. Of course, he was flying first class and he had his iPad. Now, this was, we were going under a merger or an acquisition or whatever it was. And he had his iPad. Now, this is when iPads, you had to put in the code. And I would always sit on a plane or on a train and see how silly people's codes were on their devices. And this was probably something like 1, 2, 3, 4. And when the plane landed, he jumped up and he left his iPad there. So you think about what could have happened. Now, he didn't report this for 2 days to the security team, so we couldn't remotely wipe it until then. But if you think about what could have happened, that whole deal could have been blown up. There could have been problems with insider trading. It just could have been catastrophic, for the organization and embarrassing. So I think that we really have to train our executives on what their responsibilities are too, because as we all know, they are targets for all of the phishing and social engineering attacks as well. So here's my next question. Do you have a formal incident response procedure and do your employees know who and how to report suspicious behavior? Quick one, it's either yes or no. So I'll go on to my next slide as you guys answer that. So I believe that everybody needs a incident response capability in organizations that I've run. We've had incident reporting. And actually, it was really a very good metric in the beginning of my career to be able to show that very early on that we were getting more calls coming in and less machines had to be rebuilt because they weren't infected with viruses. So anyway, but let me talk to you about a few things here. Sorry, let's go back. This is like an epic failure here, guys. I'm really sorry. I really had technical problems all morning with this. So anyway, incident reporting, you definitely need to think about setting this up and teaching your employees that they should be reporting suspicious behavior and incidents. You should have a group that's dedicated for investigations. You should have some kind of hotline. I mean, definitely have a hotline and make sure that somebody is going to be on the other side of that call to answer. So, you can't expect one person to have that phone and be on call 24/7. So it has to be a shared resource and, gets shared among the team. You should have a dedicated email box. So this way, employees can report suspicious behavior and have incident response procedures that you can go back to and use. So how did my polling come in for this last question? Do people have these, Pam? Yes or no?
You have 86% at yes and 13% at no, with about 73 participants answering.
That's awesome. Okay, so those of you that have incident reporting procedures, that's fantastic. Also, I think that it's a good metric for you to for you to look at on how many people report suspicious behavior. Okay, and this slide is not coming up. Oh, there you go. So let's talk about when your security controls fail, your employees really are your last line of defense. So, we can go back and forth on this, but you really definitely need to have your employees be able to, my goodness, I am so slow on, are you guys seeing this slide? I'm not seeing this slide. Okay.
Right now it's on cybersecurity incident reporting. And it just came up, employees not reporting suspicious behavior incidents.
Okay, I am way behind with my, I have such a lag in mine. All right, so I'm just going to move ahead to the next one.
Yeah, Suzanne, I'll go ahead and advance it for you. I'll get you where you need to be.
All right. I'm really sorry about that. This is very embarrassing. Anyway, so what I want to talk about now is really how to establish, if you can go to the slide after that one.
Got it.
That the employees have to be trained for that responsibility. So let's talk about how to set up a successful security awareness program. First and foremost, you definitely want endorsement from your CEO. And this really helps you do a lot of things. It weaves it into the corporate culture. It helps put your executives that don't want to take security awareness training at bay because they're getting the buy-in from the CEO. And I would do this in a few different ways. You could be pretty creative with this. I've done it in a number of ways where I've had a CEO send out a letter to all employees. I've had them stand in front of green screens and, do a little talk about how important security awareness is for the organization. But somehow you need to get that out there and make sure that, you can get it released, like every year or so for your employees. The other thing I like to do is have a security awareness policy. The reason why I like this is that you have, grounds to stand on when, if people are not taking the training, it's written in a policy, they're violating the policy. So I think it's really important to do that. The other thing that I would add in there is for your repeat clickers, if you want to have, depending on the type of organization you're in, some organizations really, are not thrilled if, people are in their finance team and they're clicking on campaigns because it can lead to, ransomware, business email compromise, so on and so forth. So I think a policy helps stand up your program the right way. I also highly recommend that you use assessments. I think the assessments really help you understand where your biggest risks reside within the organization, and it also identifies the areas that, are at risk, So if you're seeing, that people that are in your finance team or IT are failing on areas that they should be really knowledgeable on, that should be a big red flag on areas that you should be training them on. I can't stress enough phishing your users. I really think that is key. The simulated phishing tests, you also want to have the users also have the ability to report, a phishing scenario. So, of course, most of the vendors have a little fish button or hook or whatever it is. Just make sure that they're clicking on that and reporting them. I did find that a lot of times when you first roll it out, you really need to teach them the difference between spam and phishing because you don't want to, have all of that spam go in there. You want to see the forest through the trees. And finally, I can't stress this enough. You really need to do remedial training with your users. If you don't train your employees on what they're supposed to be looking for, they're never going to change that behavior. The one thing I will really push for with this is do not train them with the same training over and over again. And the other thing that I have seen in the past is sometimes organizations like to find the longest training module in the library of materials that we have, and then provide that. So it's more of a punishment than trying to teach them what they're doing wrong. So for remedial training, get them information on what phishing is all about, okay? Do not give them the longest module that you have in the library. I have another polling question now. How often do you train your employees? 4 answers: yearly, quarterly, monthly, or weekly. And I'm going to continue on as you guys answer that question. So when you're thinking about setting up your security awareness program, what I'm hearing from customers is that they want shorter and more frequent modules. They want entertaining, informative modules. And then, you know what, if it is both entertaining and informative, it's memorable. You know, I always said, like, you know, if we can make somebody laugh or smile, they're going to remember that information. Make sure it's effective and efficient. We have something that's coming in, it'll be announced shortly, but we have these modules that are 1 minute or less. So when you think about how advertisers work with TV commercials, right? They get very important messages out to you in a very short period of time. So I'll give you one example. One of these modules, you zoom in, this is all live actors, you zoom in and it zooms in and you're in a coffee shop. And there's a gentleman sitting there doing his shopping online. And a girl walks in and she sits down right by the door, opens up a computer. You can see she's typing in a few lines of code. She's pulling in all kinds of information. She closes her laptop. She gets up and walks out. So what's the moral of the story here? The person that was connected, that was sitting there shopping, wasn't on a VPN. So everything that he had was going across in the clear, and she stole all of that information. So if you can deliver a message like that to your employees in a very short, span of time, and also, provide like a 1-question quiz, that's a really cool way to have an ongoing training program. So when I say shorter and more frequent, if you have modules that are 1 minute or less, why not take modules like this and roll out 1 a week, or combine 3 or 4 of them and roll out, those once a month. So there's all different ways you can do that. I think the other thing you should do is think about introducing gaming into your awareness program. And I think you really need to explain to the executives what the gaming aspect is. I think for some reason, when executives hear gaming, they think that we're all going to be sitting around playing Candy Crush. And, there's a really good way of doing training through gaming that's entertaining to the end users. So, I would just show them what is in the gaming aspect. I'm very big on visual reminders. So we all have those big widescreen TVs, the displays, almost in every organization. We have these pretty cool shock-and awareness modules that, there's no words. They could just, you could just put them in a loop and let them continue going on and on, rotating through. You could put up 5 of them, 10 of them, whatever you want. But that messaging is always going out. And I must say that, whatever the messaging is that you're using, if you didn't want to do that, you could, put in posters or whatever it is, as long as it doesn't have words or anything that somebody has to stand there and either listen to or read. But, when I talk to colleges, I say it's not going to hurt if the students see a security message, or a municipality. It's not going to hurt if, a resident comes in and gets a security message. So there's ways that you can use this within your own organization. And then if you also have access to the public, it's not a bad thing to help train them as well. I also like the ongoing messaging. I'm big on posters. I like the visuals, so if they're not on the big screens, make sure that they're plastered in elevator banks so that people will see them. Use newsletters. Newsletters are really cool, especially if, you can train an employee for both their work life and their home life. And the newsletters, you can bring them home and share them with your loved ones. That's an awesome way of bringing in and, engaging the users, for your awareness program, because you're helping them not only for work, but also from home. And then you could always take those posters that you have and turn them into screensavers. There's all kinds of really cool things that you can do to make sure that the visuals and the ongoing messaging is always out there. Targeted training, when I'm going to ask this question, like, is your program mature enough to train your high-risk areas? And if you are, so for that percentage that thinks that they're at 100%, that's awesome. I hope that you are like, training your developers, training your executives, training your IT staff, so on and so forth, because, it's important to get those high risk areas trained. And then, of course, my favorite is talking about incident reporting. So, please make sure that, you do, train them, your employees, on who they should be reporting incidents to, how they should be doing it, and then you could do statistics on that later on as well. Okay, so the next slide is we're going to talk about ROI, return on investments, and KPIs. So I'm definitely a vocal advocate for creating metrics and, for your security awareness program. I think it does a lot of things. First of all, it helps keep your budget intact for the following year. But I think some of the things that you should be looking at are, your assessments. When you first do your assessment, where are the vulnerabilities, right? And then you can turn around, tweak your program, make sure you address where the weakest links are, and get your employees trained. And then you can go back in a year later and show with the assessment that actually the knowledge and the behavior is improving. I think you should always, be benchmarking your phishing, right? So in the beginning, when you first start out, what's the baseline? And then how do they improve over time? Because you will be giving them remedial training. Another one is pen testing, right? So, if you're going to train your developers, so look at your pen test before you start training your developers, and then look at your pen test, like the vulnerabilities over time. So, that's a really cool way to, to be able to show, the executives where their money is being spent and how it's improving, the security posture of the organization. Another thing I have in here is, identify the key groups, for their click rates. They're probably also the people, that are not taking the assigned training. I threw this on there. It's really a point to show, if you do it in a pie chart, and it's HR versus finance, and HR is better than finance, it almost gets competitive for the executives, and then they will start pushing their people as well. So you can do, metrics on that as well. And then at the end of the year, I would, conduct a review, look at all the data that you have, and then, that should help you drive planning for your next year. So, could we just go back to the last, my last poll, and just give me those responses?
Sure. You had 70 people respond, 56% yearly, 26% quarterly, 15% monthly, and 1% weekly. Okay,
so for those of you that are doing it yearly, I beg you to not do that. I think you really are you're doing yourself a disservice. Look at what's out there. If you have companies like we have modules that are less than a minute, there's no reason why you can't, incorporate more frequent training. And, even with the developer training, the developer training that we have, each one of those modules is 5 minutes or less. So there's really no reason to be doing, your training once a year. I think it should really be, security awareness is a journey. There's no destination here. It should be continuous and comprehensive. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective. So, I hope that you take some of this and go back and rethink about how you are rolling out your program. When I talk to customers, and I'll say to them, well, if they only want to roll out one module, I'm like, why? And they might say, well, because, it's based on, it's a regulatory requirement, or the executives say that we're only going to get, 45 minutes or 60 minutes worth of training for the entire year. And this is how I'm figuring out how to use it. And to me, I always say, well, why don't we look at maybe, doing more, shorter modules, but increasing the frequency. So this way it is ongoing. So anyway, so that's what I have for you today. I do want to ask Larry, because Larry's here as a co-presenter and I just took up all of his time. Larry, as a CEO, how do you view the importance of a program like this?
Thanks, Suzanne. You hit on a lot of great points. I think I would respond two ways. One, as a CEO of an organization, it really needs to be lead from the front, and the CEO needs to be, endorsing, present, supporting not just the IT security group, but really all business units across the organization, because they all get impacted, and it really has to be kind of an all hands together. And then getting really business unit leaders, champions, senior management to understand, really the importance of the issue of really what's needed. Again, is critical. I think executives and CEOs like a lot of data, and they want to see progress. I'm going to switch a bit in terms of both responding as a CEO, but also then helping to drive, the senior management adoption within organizations. Since we have this conversation with a lot of our, folks, our stakeholders on the IT security side and risk management side of the organization, is, if you can build that, hey, this is one of the top 5 priorities within the organization. It's not just IT security dealing with it, or the risk management group. It's not just an audit issue. We're really trying to look at it as a competitive advantage. We're keeping our client data safe. We're protecting our IP. We're preventing against either a financial or operational, event that would hurt the organization. But also, in today's market, I think internally, it should be considered, this is an opportunity where we can take a competitive advantage. And again, one analogy I would offer, just from being in the training space now for 25 years, we've worked with a lot of large organizations, of all sizes really, around their strategic programs, which required training, communication, and tracking of really organizational process, business process, IT, and so forth. And the programs I would compare where security awareness is going is really on the quality side, operational excellence. You might be familiar with calling that Lean Six Sigma, or like a safety program. And it's really, if you think and you put it on the same parallel of what the risks and the challenges are, and then you put a program in place that goes throughout the organization. This obviously goes outside of just IT security. But if that endorsement and support can kind of go across the organization, eventually, it's not going to happen overnight. But if it could be led and supported by, the CEO and the senior management of the organization, and they say, hey, this is what we need to do to protect ourselves, but also compete, then you're really running a program where every stakeholder in that organization really understands their role and the importance. And, I think as I look at the data, from the polling question on annual training versus quarterly or monthly, there are a couple of just, I think quick, immediate observations. Some organizations are mandated. They only have, as Suzanne said, that 30 minutes or 45 minutes because they got so many other training requirements throughout the year. Or it's just, again, really tough to get that support through the HR team or the communications team, or endorsed by management. One nuance that I would just suggest, because this program, as Suzanne said, needs to be iterative. You need to progress towards a continuous kind of awareness with relevant materials that engage. Is that, I kind of look at it as, don't call it training. I mean, call it communications, call it awareness, call it, other activities, Security Awareness Month. Go into targeted groups and provide them with relevant information, knowledge-based articles, best practices, examples. look at each of your audiences. If you just give the same training to everybody in the organization, you're checking a box. It could be, again, there are certain challenges, and we understand every organization has priorities. But this is a growing one. Obviously, that's a risk to the business if it's, as Suzanne said, it's somewhat of a ticking time bomb, and too many organizations don't respond to it early enough. So we would really suggest you meet those challenges by finding opportunities and different resources to get that adoption at the senior level, but then also give the senior level options and ideas in terms of how this can really be broadened across the organization, relevant to different groups in the organization. So HR, finance, manufacturing, finance, they understand, and they're getting material information that says the company and the organization sees this as really important. And you're also saying, we see a lot of companies now in a positive way telling their customers, hey, we're being very proactive. We want to protect your data, and here's what we're doing about it, and we're serious, and enlisting their support. Just going back to kind of metrics, what I would also suggest is if a dashboard or basically a progress report structure is available to be put together either from the top down or basically from the security group up to management, is that show your baseline and your starting point, develop a plan annually, quarterly, show those, not all the data may look very attractive in the starting point, but there's a progressive, there are a number of levels that you can really show. It's not just about reducing the clicks on phishing. There's physical security, there's privacy data, there's different groups that are at risk. And as you move from compliance to satisfaction to adoption into an integrated program that's going out to targeted users with continuous support and marketing and internal communications, you're really then moving to that top level where you're really now starting to find organizational change and really kind of a culture change aspect, that term we all kind of put out there. I mean, that's the end game. And then you sustain from there because the environment's always changing. But if you can map towards those, because every organization is somewhat unique, you really can start to see the progress, identify where we need to work a little harder or things that need to shift. And that's, how we normally work with organizations so that we, can partner, understand what their priorities are and, provide some level of guidance in terms of what their options are in product or, different tools they can use to help move the program forward.
Thanks, Larry. That's awesome. I think we have a bunch of questions. Kip, do you want to?
Yeah, I've been waiting patiently to give these questions to you. So great. Well, I definitely have some great questions here. So there's a college education going to get funded for sure. So how do you avoid training being looked at as something that's disciplinary, consequential? It's a negative. So if they fail the test, how do you make it so that it doesn't look that way or that they don't have that perception?
I think, when you first do this and you set up your awareness program and, you put out, I would put an announcement out to the organization that, we're trying to make you, strong, being our last line of defense. And, this is where you can get into areas where, maybe you don't report on the person, right? And they just take their remedial training and you see that they're improving over time. Because you want them to be part of your security army, I guess we can say. So, I really never had a problem with it. I think the biggest problem comes when you have executives that don't want to have the they don't want to have the phishing simulations sent to them because they're embarrassed when they get them wrong. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think in the beginning, when you lay out your program, this is to, enhance the security of the organization, and people will learn as we continue educating them.
Yeah, I like that. And I like your corporate motto as well, being the human firewall. I think that really resonates. I don't know if it resonates with the general populace, but from my perspective, it's like, yeah, that's cool. I want to be a part of that. So, yeah, great. Okay, next question here. It says, as we move toward automation, I like this question, AI, ML, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and we're basically removing that human factor, how do we see the shift in evolution of training the humans to the automated guardrails?
That's a hard one to answer.
Yeah.
Because you're always still going to have the humans involved. I don't, think about your developers, right? You're still going to have your developers developing code. People are still going to be receiving emails. I don't know if any of those will ever be 100%. So I don't really have a good answer for that. I have to say, honestly, I can give it some thought and then send it back out to, to Pam, and she can send it out to the participants.
Sure. Well, and also you provided your email address directly too. So if that's insufficient, then they can certainly reach out to you directly. So I appreciate that. Okay, next question here I'm interested in gaining arguments, strategy for convincing the executive suite, and I know you hit on this a little bit, but I think they want a little bit more, that a 2 to 3 hour cybersecurity training session will be extremely beneficial. So what kind of, how can they win the case that this is the right thing from the organization?
Well, first of all, I would never give somebody 2 to 3 hours of training all at once. Sure. And I think that's where, you can think about, you could draw the line in the sand and say, okay, everybody's going to take this training, right? So you just have your baseline done. And then anybody new that comes into the organization would get that baseline. But after that, that's where I think that you should branch off and go into more shorter, entertaining, informative modules, like, if they're just a few minutes or a minute or less. I think that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. And even with, the developer training, I mentioned before, those simulations are 5 minutes each. So I don't think that you really need as much training as you're thinking for 2 to 3 hours. I think you can get an awful lot done in even less time than that. And I think that will make your executives happy, and it will certainly make your employees happy.
Kip, just to add to what Suzanne said and respond to the question, I would agree. We would typically advise, let's have a less than 1 hour, perhaps 30 minutes kind of core training, with again, some monthly, quarterly, or supplemental training that would be from a general standpoint for users. If you're really, as an organization, to answer that question, really looking for just some ideas, just a couple of thoughts. One, you have your core training, you have the supplemental training, but if you identify targeted user groups, HR, finance, sales, execs, you could break out special role-based training, or IT and developers. So you have your core training, then basically you have your targeted level training. So now you're getting deeper, more granular, more relevant. And then within those departments, they may want to come up, with another, again, they give them some options. They might want to have a 45-minute webinar, to talk about, situations in their discipline related to security, or somebody from the IT sec team or a consultant comes in. So again, you could maybe make that an entire morning or afternoon. Maybe again, I'm thinking outside of just the web-based side. There's the virtual, there could be the one-on-one, depending on the audience. But again, just throwing out, if it's just general informative training, meant kind of like for everyone at all ends, I would probably agree, 2 to 3 hours is probably a little heavy, but I think you can, if you break it into the general awareness that is rich, updated, informative, you then go into the supplemental, targeted, relevant training. You then supplement that with, let's say, some games, activities that challenge them in a fun way. Then you could do more of the personalized training, let's say, within a department. And that could be done by, again, champions, managers. That really builds this kind of integrated, kind of buy-in. So again, just some ideas. As I said, I think there's training, there's communication, and, there's really the level of work group, processes that can benefit from it.
Yeah, great. Now, there was a follow-up question to that one, just with regard to the developer side of the training. Does that help them to fulfill their PCI training requirements?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so next question here. Hey, I'm currently working on our organization's first user awareness training. Is a 30-point PowerPoint slide too much?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I knew you'd say that.
You know what I would do?
Yeah.
Think about when you're doing this. Can you bring in some videos to into the mix? There's some things that you can even find like on YouTube. So I always say that security awareness should not be boring. And a lot of times when we're dealing with PowerPoints and stale donuts, people are not paying attention. They're looking at their iPhone. So you want to have them engaged. So, even if you think about, asking questions out to the group, playing a game during the time, or really finding a security awareness vendor that you can work with that will make your life easier, I think that's probably the way to go. You can ping me after this on my email, and we can chat about it if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, good. Now we've got just a few more minutes, so let me ask you another question here. It says, do you have any recommendations that can assist with getting associates more involved? For example, if we consistently see the same group of people not participating in the campaigns and we want to get them reporting and participating as opposed to ignoring the emails, how can we go about doing that?
Yeah, this is something it's interesting, right? Because sometimes, you don't want to make it like it's, you're forcing it down their throat. That was like the one question that was asked to me. But, on this side, if you have a security awareness policy that states that they must take, training, they're going to have to take the training. But I would try and make the training, a little bit more entertaining and informative, so this way it's memorable to them. And, even if they get a little chuckle out of something, they'll remember it. The other thing that you can think about is when you train them, when you make the announcement in the beginning, talking about the awareness program, or an announcement comes out from your CEO, you can always state that you're training your employees not only for them and their work life, but also for their home life. And I think that really worked wonders, for me in the past, so things, giving them materials like a newsletter or something like that they can share with their loved ones. It really does. It takes on a whole life of its own.
No, that's great. All right, I think we've got time for one more, and I think this is an intriguing one here. It's just a lot of training seems to rely on the antiquated TTP, such as misspelled words, broken, poor language skills, false sense of urgency. Those are great. Those are truly accurate. As their main training points, how would you advise approaching training beyond these commonly used, quote unquote, low bar indicators?
I would not train anybody like that. Okay. Especially if you want to be using real phishing examples, you're not really seeing that many, issues like that anymore. They've learned from their mistakes, so they're getting better and better at it. I would maybe look at who your training provider is, and maybe that needs to be shaken up a little bit. But I would definitely make sure that you're dealing with issues that are happening real time, like now. So and the phishing simulation, has really gotten a lot better over the years, and and we know what works with the employees, and you really need to train them the right way. So also for their home life as well as their work life.
Perfect. All right. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you, everybody, for contributing and participating today. I'm going to turn it over to Pam. She's got a few closing comments for us, and then we'll call it a day.
Kip, thanks very much. And Suzanne and Larry, thank you. That was a really wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And again, thank you to Global Learning Systems for their generous support of the presentation. As a reminder, after the event today, the presentation slides and a recorded version of the webinar will be available on the ISSA web conference page. You'll also be able to print a viewing certificate on this webcast page on Bright Talk that you can submit for continuing education credits such as CPE and CEUs. If you do have any questions, please contact us at memberservices@issa.org. You are also invited to join us October 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next webinar, where our topic will be innovating your career in the new security and privacy frontier. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.